everybody? Welcome to the UK Packers podcast. We have two people. Do you know what I said to Wes? This is Wes Hodkiewicz, by the way. If you don't know who Wes is, get out from underneath your rock here, right? Wes, the first works for Packers.com. We're gonna have a little bit of fun here, Wes. I like to say that you and I's personality is like a wasp trapped in a bottle, so I think we're going to capture some of that. We'll be talking over each other, getting very excited. But I have a gripe with you, Wes. We have to bring the gripe. Look at my background, and I've got stuff splashed all over me. And where are you? Is that a green screen so that we don't see the Super Bowl trophy?
So, here's the thing, dude. I did consider this, like trying to like book out a conference room or somewhere else in Lambeau Field. But I was like, you know what? I finally got an office at Lambeau. I'm going to record it from my office. Unfortunately, it's a brand new office, and you have all that tremendous stuff in the background there. I have nothing here. I got to step my game up is basically the moral of the story.
Yeah, no, it's true. So look, let's start there. So senior writer, partner in crime of Spoff, which again, we spoke about this in pre-production. Spofford needs to bring back the partner in crime thing because I love the idea of Wes and Spoff on a mass crime spree all across Wisconsin. But aside from that, you are you're managing digital content strategy. Couple of questions. Are we still going to see Wes on the pod? Does Wes still write? Is Wes going to pivot? Are you going to become an influencer, Wes? I mean, are we going to see you now holding up matcha lattes and all that kind of stuff? I mean, what's involved with all of that?
This green and gold like latte now. No, I mean it's really fun. So obviously I've crossed 10 years now with the Packers, and they've given me so many incredible opportunities, chances to work with gentlemen like yourself and so many great people across the Packers blogosphere and around the world. I think this change that we had is kind of trying to dive a little bit more into that. I think at the end game of where we're trying to work towards is to have a bigger presence with YouTube, to kind of push forward some of these other social media apps that we have. And I'm going to be sort of not steering it, but I'm going to be a part of that whole crusade. So I'm still writing for Insider Inbox. I'm still doing our features and day-to-day coverage. They didn't add another writer, so it's still me and Spofford. That job still has to get done. But my boss, Duke Bobber, and everybody on my end of things, they've done a tremendous job. Renee Gabriel, our social media manager, and trusting me to, allow me to spread my wings a little bit more. So I'm going to be working a little bit more behind the scenes with some of our other people and content creators with the Packers, and hopefully turn out some pretty cool content. That's going to be it's going to be I don't want to call it a slow moving process, but it's going to be gradual. But I think over the long run, I think it should really help our platforms and try to connect even more with Packer fans. Everyone loves, video, Q&As, all that type of stuff. I think we're trying to meet people where they are, beyond just the written aspect, which is still very important.
Yeah, it's funny you say that actually, because I love the written word and books and all that kind of stuff, but it is moving towards video, right? That's what grabs attention. And you've got to toe the line, I guess, between controversial stuff and stuff that's interesting, and then there's a whole science behind hooks and stuff like that. But as far as I'm concerned, more Wes Hod involvement and stuff around the Packers, the better, all right? Just throw Wes Hod into the recipe, into the soup. And with that being said, Wes, I have a job for you. I want this to be the off-season podcast for everything Packers, right? So if anyone was going to listen to a podcast, I want this to be it. We want all the recaps, all the stuff that's happening in the off-season, what we're going to look forward to. I also want to pick your brain, if I may, because again, I see a little bit of it, right? I see sort of behind the curtain a bit, where there's stuff that goes on and people have expectations of things that you can and should say that you can't say because certain things. I'll get it out better when I ask the questions. But I'd love to pick your brain on what it's like to have a swanky, albeit plain office in Lambeau Field, and to sort of, is there anything, and let it ruminate, right? Is there anything that fans believe is a certain way that you kind of want to say it actually doesn't work like that, right? One of them, as an example, is the Packers fans over here used to say stuff like, the Packers don't care about coming over to London. They don't want to play here, right? Now, from listening to Matt LaFleur's press conference, that sounds true, right? But when we spoke to Mark Murphy, he was sort of saying, look, the Packers actually don't have any sway here. And he used to go up to the other owners and ask them would they give up a home game against the Packers, which is very lucrative, and they'd always say no, and the NFL had to force them, right? But again, we had to battle against that narrative that the Packers somehow don't care about the fans, which is nonsense. But before we get down all that thing, if we may, and it might be sore, right? Let's look back at last season, Wes, and I've spoken now for 10 minutes, so take the floor for as long as you like. When you look back at last season, because inevitably I'm going to ask you the question, what condition do you think the team is in now? How do you think we're going to do in the upcoming season? And I know that's a crystal ball question. Rosters change. But when you look back at, say, the prediction or your opinion that you had of the team before going into last season, how do you think it panned out, and why do you think it failed the way it did?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and I don't typically like being the guy that compares like former teams to current teams because as you and I both know, I mean things change so fast, right? But in a lot of ways, the more I got away from last season, the more 2025 reminded me of 2013. In that, the Aaron Rodgers collarbone happened. Obviously, they get to the playoffs. It ended the way it ended against San Francisco. But you looked at the totality of the football team and you said to yourself, I mean, there's so many pieces here, right? Like in 2013, they had the NFL Offensive Rookie of the Year in Eddie Lacy. They had struggled to break the cover two. They had struggled to find a running back to be their bell cow. Lacy was that guy. In many ways, I feel like that's where the Packers are at entering 2026. Would everyone have loved to want to win a Super Bowl last season? Absolutely. When they were sitting at 9-3-1, and it seemed like they were sort of finally getting and ironing out some of the wrinkles they had during that final stretch when they went to Denver and Micah Parsons tears his ACL. That it felt before that game like this is potentially the best team in this conference. They could get that bye. They could get on a run here, and injuries kind of told a different tale. You have to be able to get through this 17 game gauntlet to have a chance at this thing, not just with the record, but also just with keeping your football team healthy. Green Bay wasn't able to do it last year. They talk about the next man up, but they were so down to the felt when you have whatever it was, right? 18, 19 transactions the last week of the regular season, trying to stitch together this roster. It was a sour, bitter note in how the season ended in Chicago. But when you take the emotion out of it, when you step forward and realize this was the youngest team in the NFL 3 years in a row, they have players now that are entering their prime, and they've extended now with Christian Watson and Jaden Reed both being parts of that. Hopefully Tucker Kraft soon to follow. Now they're entering their championship window. So to counter your long-winded question, I give you a long-winded answer, but I just feel like we're on the precipice of something special here. You have to get it done. They have to have better luck. They have to do better with the injuries. They got to finish games better. But this football team is extremely talented, and a lot of their primary guys now are in the prime of their career.
Yeah, it's a good point you raise. And look, be as long winded as you like, all right? Because to be long winded back to an Irishman is a challenge in itself. There's an awful lot to unpack, and we don't want to sort of dwell on the past. And I do want to talk about the team and the sort of mechanics of the off season and stuff like that. And I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, because I'll go on and explain it, but there's also sort of an addition by subtraction. I mean, the wide receiver room was very crowded. Christian Watson was coming off that ACL injury. Stuff wasn't really settled there. And now Romeo Dobbs, love the guy. He's gone. Dontavian Wicks is also gone. So they say that about marketing, don't they? Where if you go into a store and you have 1,000 chocolate bars, you'll leave paralyzed, not knowing what to pick. Whereas if you have a focal point and you're 4, well, then it's very easy to come up with that strategy, right? And you'd expect Golden to be coming into the playbook a little bit more because he's settled in and they'll design plays for him and stuff like that. Do you think that was the key of the failure? I mean, it sounds obvious, right? Because Devontae Wyatt went out, and then Micah Parsons went out, Tucker Kraft went out, and in their own right, I know Devontae Wyatt was really coming into his own. It seemed like after those injuries, we couldn't surmount them, right? Is that unfair? And using that as a launch point, Wes, like if those players, and they are going to be out, right? Because Micah Parsons, there's rumors he's going to be out for X amount of weeks. We won't speculate. And then Tucker Kraft looks really good, but you never really know. Are we starting off the season in a better place because of the NFL draft, which I was at, by the way, and everything else? Or are we still in a bit of a waiting game? Because I know you said next man up, but the next man up to Micah Parsons, it's a pretty tough boots to follow, right? So where does this team stand after all of that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Stephen. And I look at it, looking just starting with the receivers. I think it wasn't even to the detriment they had so many receivers. It was that at one given time, they didn't actually have their set core, right? I mean, it was Christian Watson was out, and then Jaden Reed is out, and you couldn't get into a rhythm with whoever was on the field. Where I have kind of the analogy I've been using all offseason is they've figured out what their primary ingredients are for what they want to make. And they have now gone all in on those ingredients. Now, that makes it more difficult if you lose a Watson or you lose a Reed or you lose a Golden. The depth isn't as big there as it was last season. But I think it also allows Matt LaFleur and this coaching staff from day one to figure out, okay, what are we going to major in offensively with this? We got these 3 receivers. We got Savion Williams, Bo Melton, and some prospects there behind him. We got Tucker Kraft. We got, Josh Jacobs and Marshawn Lloyd in the backfield once they get the whole, running back thing figured out. This is the direction our offense is going to go, and we're going to win this way. And you can still do all the stuff Jordan Love's been doing. You can still feed the guy that's open. You can still spread it all out. But that's going to be more based on touches, right? It's not going to be based on reps. And that was the challenge, trying to get Dontavian Wicks on the field, trying to find ways to integrate all these pieces while still being, in many ways, a base 2 tight end offense. That's the way, historically, they'd like to run this thing under Matt LaFleur. So just directly pinpointing the receiving core, I think that's going to be a really big launching pad for them now. The runway is clear for Matthew Golden. The runway is clear now for Reed and Watson and Tucker Kraft. That's going to be your pass catchers, and we'll see what they do with it. The one thing I like, and again, this is an extreme silver lining, I know, because you want Micah Parsons on the field. But the Packers very likely will have to learn how to swim without him that first month of the season. That's where it's going to be up to Lucas Van Ness and Barron Sorrell and Brenton Cox Jr. and hopefully Colin Oliver, although he missed the offseason program with an undisclosed injury. And then, you throw in Denai Dennis Sutton into that equation as well. Who's going to step up and grab that opportunity? I'm very excited to see who that individual is going to be. I thought Barron Sorrell looked fantastic at the end of the season when he finally got the ops. Lucas Van Ness was a man on fire, throughout the offseason program. Again, that pads weren't on, but he looked the way you wanted him to look coming off of that foot injury. And realistically, we'll just have to see how the defensive front all comes together here under Jonathan Gannon. But the Packers, in the long run, if Micah Parsons comes back and is playing at that all-pro level again, I think what's going to happen that first month in September could actually make them a better defense by the time you get to the end of the year.
Yeah, no, true too. I mean, there's over-reliance. Now, I know that sounds very simplistic from us, right? Because we're like, it's sink or swim. You have to. You're going to model your defense around it. Because when Devontae Adams was in Green Bay, Matt LaFleur was unabashed by saying, oh yeah, 80% of the playbook was directed at him. Everyone else was just running dummy routes, right? It was Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams. And again, that's a bad thing. You sort of think and go, well, it's one-dimensional, but then it's Devontae Adams, right? It's the best footwork in the NFL. It's Aaron Rodgers, like, running high with the MVP seasons. So you do what works, and it gives very little reps for anybody else at that stage. So true to your point, I think if they know they don't have Micah Parsons, they don't just go, Micah, go out there and wreck stuff. I know it's not that simple, but it is that simple in a way when you have a Micah Parsons, because it's like having a Ferrari. And people go, well, why do you keep driving the Ferrari to work? And you're like, because it's very fast. It's the best way to get to work very fast. So why would you not? Look, I'll tell you what we do. I'd love to talk about the big off-season stories when it comes around the team and the draft, and kind of what you saw and the limited amount maybe that you saw when you get access. And that's kind of what I want to key in on, right? Because the assumption, I believe, when you have your own office in Lambeau, you get to walk in and you see the guys walking around all the time. From what we hear, Matt LaFleur is like a moth with a light. He's always there. He's always circling around the building, trying to get better, right? So I think the assumption is, and maybe this is just me, is that, you go home with Jordan Love and you, Ronica, Jordan, and Baby sit down and watch TV shows together, and you've unfettered access to the Love household and all the players. At any time you can walk up and say, give us your inner thoughts. I would imagine, Wes, that isn't the case. Can you enlighten us as to, although you work for the team, what is your access like, and do you have to request certain things that people wouldn't think?
I think it just depends on the player and the person, right? So I'll give you a great example of this. Jordan Love, myself, and Spoff, we're working on the Packers yearbook right now. I'm doing a feature on Jordan. So Jordan's a very busy man, right? Just like Aaron Rodgers before him in that seat when you're QB1. Yeah. So like everybody else, whether it's me or a different member of the media, we work through the PR staff to work that out, to set that time up. The one benefit I probably have that maybe other media people don't, like when I did go talk to Jordan, we just grabbed a couch down in the football area and talked for 20 minutes. Like that's just, I can go into those different places. It's just about making sure that you line everything up, you schedule it out. It's no different than if you're at, your place of business and you got to schedule a meeting, right? I just happen to be interviewing people, not talking about, the third quarter revenue. So, but the one thing that was really fun about it,
Don't knock the third quarter revenue now. The third quarter revenue is a very interesting topic. But moving on.
But the one thing I really like about this locker room, so again, I'm going into year 11 with the Packers. This is my 15th year covering the team full time already. I cannot believe that. But this is probably one of my all time favorite locker rooms, what they have. I just think the type of dudes that they've brought in and the culture that's sort of developed now with Jordan Love, it's a very inviting, friendly, just optimistic sort of thing. And the thing that's cool now too is I think when we were younger, when before Instagram was big and before Twitter was big and the social media thing had really completely exploded, yeah, I think there were a lot of guys that were pretty isolated to it because were they really turning on the news at night? They probably weren't reading the paper in most cases unless it was brought to them. So many of these guys now, especially on the team side of things, they understand what digital and social do. They understand that that's a part of their brand as well and what we bring to the table, specifically our social media department, all the cool stuff that they've been doing. So the buy-in there is tremendous. And then when you have somebody like Jordan, who's just as cool as they come in terms of a superstar, they're just the best. I had a good conversation with him about this for the story. I mean, the number one thing I've heard from anybody off the record is the coolest thing about Jordan Love is he is the same guy today in year 7 as he was when he was a completely unproven, but full of potential first round pick back in 2020. Major contracts haven't changed him. Becoming the starting quarterback of the Green Bay Packers hasn't changed him. That dude stays true to himself, and you would feel it too if you sit down with him. I mean, he is just, it's like you're talking to anybody that you work with or He's just that kind of cat. And what's neat about it too is I didn't get the chance to cover Brett Favre, obviously, but Aaron Rodgers from the ground, from the bottom, like Spoff did, like from the very beginning. I caught him after he'd already won a Super Bowl and won an NFL MVP. Jordan, I watched him in that first training camp back in 2020 when we're all wearing our masks and we're 6 feet apart and there's nobody around, right? And now you see him and what he's grown into. That's one of the coolest things. So I think the Packers do. I don't know how it is for other NFL teams, but in terms of what I do, like our PR department, everybody else, football ops, they've not been anything but tremendous in terms of what we need to accomplish and how we go about getting our content. For me, it's mostly just about making sure that this is an invited space. This is not my house. I just got to make sure that I'm being cognizant of other people's time, and kind of being where I'm supposed to be when I'm supposed to be there, and not really stretching those privileges.
It's a unique position in what you do because you cover the team. You're a professional journalist. You came from the paper world, as did Cliff Crystal, into the Packers. Is there, I guess, I don't even know how I'm phrasing this question, but you'd obviously get to see a lot and hear a lot, and there's a lot of off-the-record conversations, and then you see someone coming in. I don't know if you see someone coming in and they've got a bit of a limp, right? And you're thinking, oh no, like what?
Sure,
you know what I mean? You sort of, you get ahead of things. Is it a weird position sometimes that, and I guess if we can wrap it up into the overall question is there a couple of things that you see as the normal and you see fans with a certain perspective and you go, that's not actually how that works, so is there anything like that? So I guess what I'm saying is that with the information that you have, and when someone asks you a question in inbox, is there a part of you that goes, oh, this could be so easily answered by just telling them that this thing, but I can't say that because it's not public information, so you have to come at it from a different way? And is there any sort of overall theme, Wes, of the way fans will always ask a certain style of question and you go, it simply doesn't work like that? That's not how the NFL works.
Yeah, I love that question, Stephen. And you're 100% spot on. We deal with it, especially in the season, right? Sometimes a little bit afterwards, but people tend to be a little bit more level-headed once the year's done. I mean, they're just emotions drive, reactions. So when you don't have that like fire stoking below you, you can think of things more rationally. The two things, there was someone that actually asked me a similar question to this in inbox this past winter. And I said, if there was ever like one falsehood that I think gets perpetuated by fans, is that the idea that players are soft. None of these guys are soft. Some of them might be dealing with some stuff, but the things that I've seen in terms of what it can look like sometimes for guys in the building the day after a game, what they put themselves through when they're walking, out of that locker room, what that crash that you just been involved in, and what they have to do to get themselves right for the following Sunday. I think that's always really tough. and I also, to kind of tie this back to a specific player, it's one of the things I've been saying a lot about Marshawn Lloyd, for the Packers' former third round pick going into year 3 now, but he's only played in one regular season game. Uh, like the way that this guy has conducted himself and how he's handled us with the media, on the record, off the record, just the professionalism he's carried himself with. There is nobody in this world that's more frustrated by the fact that he hasn't been able to overcome these injuries than Marshawn. And then, you get the chirping on social media and everything like that. But the reality is, when you hear Matt LaFleur and Brian Gutekunst talk about him, and you hear him mention, like, this guy has something special, and you can actually go out to the practices like we did this past spring in the OTAs and minicamp, and you're watching him put his foot into the ground on a one cut and just accelerate, looking like he's, Maurice Jones-Drew out there. I mean, he is a special, special talent, and there's a reason why the Packers have been this patient trying to get him back on the field. So many times, and this is just, it's fans only know so much, so it's understandable. But the thing I always have encouraged people to think about is the fact that you are seeing such a small portion of the true story. It's okay to have your thoughts on it. That doesn't mean they're not placed and not balanced and not reasonable. But don't think you know everything by only seeing something. And that's probably one of the bigger things that I always have kind of struggled with in this job, is that even myself, someone that is on this side of the wall, I only see so much as well. But it's you're getting the cliff notes, and in many ways, people are trying to act like they have every answer to the final exam.
Yeah, and what fascinates me, like the player is one thing, and I know what you mean. Like Marshawn Lloyd, I think there was a planned sit out in one of the practices, and that was just stated as fact on social media, and people went off going, "Oh, of course," and they start sort of digging into him. But what sort of strikes me is that the NFL, and you'll know this more than anybody else, is that it's a real person game, right? Is that these are real people and they've real stuff going on, and I don't know what happened with Romeo Dobbs last season or the season before when he sat out and it was that kind of stuff. And again, when you don't know, sometimes they fill the vacuum with stuff, right? And that's the way it is. And what fascinates me is when it comes to coaches, because you look at it and go, what type of guy is Matt LaFleur? Because he's very polished and he's, when he gets up on a thing, what is Gutekunst's strategy? I'd love to know sort of the ins and outs of what happened when the Aaron Rodgers to Jordan Love sort of transition was happening and what people felt at the time. And I really hope Brian Gutekunst, even Russ Ball, writes a book about it and tells exactly what was going on behind the scenes, because like even you in the building, I mean, he's not going to, well, maybe he does, maybe you're his best mate, but he's not going to sit down and sort of go like, Wes, come on, let's sit down and I'll tell you my innermost feelings. He has to keep his cards close to his chest, and that's professionalism, everything else like that. But look, let's leave that aside, right? Because I just wonder, is Wes Hodkiewicz the Michael Bublé of, Packers sports journalism?
You love this.
I love this, right? I'm going to lean straight into this, right? But I just feel like the off season happens, and I used to say this to people who had sort of seasonal jobs as such, and I'd say, "Oh, you're getting plenty of time off," and they'd say, "I think I've gone off, have I?" So they turn around and they would say stuff like, "Oh no, the actual busiest part of the season is this part of the season because we're trying to get everything ready." Do you go off into a cave somewhere, Wes, and just go and slumber and hibernate, and then you sort of dive back out again when Packer season comes around? And I guess the better question is what is your regular season job like versus the off season? Is it Bublé-esque, if you will?
Very much so. No, I mean, here's what I think a lot of people sometimes don't realize. I'm going to take some time off here, but the actual slumbering has already happened. Spofford and I, in February and March, we split that time off. So once the Packers season, you want them to win the Super Bowl, right? That's the goal for everybody. But when they get eliminated, when they have been eliminated, the NFL train keeps moving, right? We've reached our final destination, but the NFL is still going. That's actually sometimes our best window to break away a little bit, because the conversation isn't centered around the Packers. And we haven't gotten to the combine yet. We haven't gotten to free agency or the draft. And it took me many years, but I've actually kind of finally figured that out. Like, that's the only time, usually March, 2 weeks in March, is like where I have the best shot to get like an extended break. Because right now, this time of the year, yeah, there's not anything going on, but the Packers media guide's getting finalized. We're putting together our plans for the yearbook, for the game program, our position by position series, which will go up before training camp. I was working on a story right now on Christian Watson and Noah Polley, who now Polley's here as the receivers coach, but they were together at North Dakota State before. So like, there's always something to kind of write about this time of year. It's just we are now getting close to the start of this thing, so we try to make sure that we go into it fresh. But yeah, I'm kind of like a bear a little bit. It's the winter months is actually where I've do my most slumbering. Now we're just like next week I'm going to a concert. The week after that we're doing Outsider Inbox, so I'll put that together. Our little Q&A where we ask the fans questions instead of them asking us questions. And then I have a week off after that. I'm going to be in Chicago for a couple days. That's about it. Like otherwise it's right back to football. And Domofsky always says this. He feels like the previous season ends during minicamp, and he's not necessarily wrong with that. I just feel like the off-season program is like pre-training camp. Like, okay, we have started the next season, and yeah, it's time to work.
So this is what I'm saying about this is the off-season podcast. If you're going to listen to something, listen to this. Now, I will sort of say a caveat from the very beginning. There was that situation with Josh Jacobs. No one knows what's going on with that. It's a legal matter. We're not talking about it, right? So we're sort of going to take that as an off-season storyline out of the equation. With that aside, what are the biggest stories of the offseason? And to be honest with you, I mean, what should we be looking for as fans with the offseason? Because, you know, it's players coming in, they're getting their roster bonuses, they're not in pads, they're doing walkthroughs and stuff like that. Can you give us a flavor of what the offseason is actually for and where is the value there?
Well, right now for the veterans, it was 8 weeks, right? And then they actually excused them during the last week OTAs. That was just a rookie week. So it is, I think, when you look at like Jordan Love, right, in the offense, it's more about, okay, how are we going to evolve this playbook? He obviously has Matt LaFleur back. LaFleur signing his extension earlier this year. Okay, which direction are we going offensively and how are we going to get there? You bring in a few new pieces, but in general, they already have their identity. This is a very critical time, though, for defense and special teams, and probably really specifically Cam Acord and the new special teams unit replacing Rich Bisaccia as coordinator, because that does look different. The practices, the format, the time that they're spending on it, the drills that they're doing, it looks different than what Bisaccia did. And not that that's good or bad. I'm just telling you, for the guys that are back from last year's roster, they're learning new stuff. There's a new approach to how they're teaching that. And then defensively, Jonathan Gannon is coming in with an entirely new scheme. I know a lot will be made about the 3-4 to 4-3. That's fine. But realistically, it's what are they doing within the actual defense, not just one particular sub package. From what I saw, I really like what Gannon brings. And I think when you hear all this stuff, people talking about, you know, he will design schemes and game plans based on specific opponents, I felt like we saw parts of that throughout the offseason program. I mean, this is a guy, if you like the simulated pressures that Jeff Hafley did, you know, where it looks like they're going to blitz, but they only send 4, but you don't know where they're coming from. I think Gannon even turns that notch a little bit farther with how he approaches that. I think there's going to be a lot of the inside linebackers and slot cornerbacks and maybe even the safeties involved in some of those blitz packages. I think the defense and special teams learning this scheme, you got to remember the offseason program, if you're there for the whole thing, you pretty much are getting your pre-run through on the playbook and the installs for training camp. I know Mike McCarthy always used to like to say that when you get to training camp, the offense and the defense, it's already been installed. Now you're doing it for real. So that work is in there. I think you look at some of the guys that are coming back and rehabbing, like Tucker Kraft. I mean, the guy looked the same as Christian Watson a year earlier, just a man possessed and someone that appears like he could just throw on pads today and play. Now, whether or not, you know, he's back at the start of training camp or back the second week of training camp, I think, you know, he's cleared the hurdles he's needed to clear to get closer to back to playing. So just balancing the storylines and the narratives with what we're actually seeing in terms of the scheme is sort of the challenge of the offseason program. But certainly for the Packers, I felt like this particular one with all the news that had happened, the extensions, the new coaches, this was definitely one of the bigger headlines, I would say, as far as the Green Bay Packers offseason programs have gone.
I mean, because look, the focus is on Micah Parsons on his timeline for return, Tucker Kraft, his timeline for return and potential contract extension. But like you say, I mean, there isn't a lot of talk about Gannon and the new scheme. And as you said, special teams, completely forgot about it. Even though, I mean, you know, what is it, 30% of the special teams unit for kicking is Irish. Right. So it should really be more up on it. I've got a really good chance of actually playing for the Packers if you're Irish, because they'd Mark McNamee sort of floating around there as well. Last question about the offseason, Wes. When you see the rookies coming in, Then you see the jump from, say, rookie mini camp, and then they come in next year for the sophomore season. Are they like school children that are coming in first grade or whatever it is, and sort of they look a bit sort of put out? They don't know how to practice professionally. And how do the other players that are coming back? Do they take them under their wing? Do they go, here's where your locker is? I mean, sort of what are we dealing with? What level of naivety is it for these rookies? Are they really
fresh? It's not
fresh?
just the rookies too, right? I mean, Zaire Franklin, all-pro linebacker, he even talked with us about how he was still asking guys, where to find the bathrooms at Lambeau Field. I mean, anybody that enters a new work environment, there's going to be a little bit of a transition there. But I actually think, looking at the rookies and the offseason program, I think they're still young, but I would compare it probably more to like a 5th or 6th grader than a kindergartner. I think a lot of these guys looked wise beyond their years. There was a time, and I was actually having this conversation with the Packers rookie 5th-round pick, Jagger Burton. There was a time when McCarthy was here, rookies would not see first-team reps in the offseason program. If they had to put out a practice squad holdover that signed a week before the end of the season ahead of a rookie, that's what they were going to do. That's changed now. Brandon Cisse, Chris McClellan, the Packers' first-round pick, or second-round pick, cornerback, and McClellan, their third-round pick, a defensive tackle. Both of those guys were in the starting defensive rotation in the offseason program. Burton, probably due to a few more injuries, but still was elevated to being that backup guard with the first-team unit when Aaron Banks wasn't practicing. They're giving guys opportunities now, and you don't do that if you don't think that they're mentally ready for them. Because, the pads aren't on. You're not going to have these big one-on-one collisions. You're not going to get, like, the type of stuff we're going to see probably 2 or 3 weeks into the training camp. But if you're not able to mentally take those snaps and avoid error, this coaching staff is not going to put you out there. So I actually think this rookie class in a lot of ways looks a little further ahead than some of the ones I've seen during my time on the beat. The question just becomes, once you do go through that first week of training camp, when the pads do go on, how does that change the way that you play, and also being able to meet that speed of the game when you're no longer just in kind of the joggers and shorts. And that's going to be where these guys are really going to have to differentiate themselves.
Yeah, and that can't be understated, right? Because, again, I know exactly what it's like because I coached my son's under-9 football team. So, again, the parallels are incredible, right? The piss temperature is through the roof when it comes to training. But it's like that. I mean, you only get a certain amount of time. We had 1 hour, like twice a week, and then you'd have a game, right? So, and then most of the time the kids are just trying to hit each other with footballs and spray each other with water bottles, right? Which I'm sure there's probably a bit more of a professionalism when it comes to the Packers. But it's like that. The same premise applies, right? Is that you've a limited amount of time, a limited amount of snaps. You have all of these hungry mouths to feed. You've got to try bring people up to speed on things while it's also not neglecting the people that will be there taking that position, day one. So yeah, I don't think it can be understated that the rookies have already got times with the ones to see that standard, right? But anyway, look, I've had you for long enough. Like an Irish man who invites you into his house, I'll never let you go until you're like, no, I really need to go. You know what I mean? I have to leave. So what if you could pick out a couple of players, Wes, maybe 1, 2, 3, as many as you like, that you've witnessed in the very, very small sample size in off season? Marshawn Lloyd sounds like one of them, right? Who should we be looking out for this season that you said there's something different about that guy?
I really, 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 really want Marshawn Lloyd to stay healthy. For starters, he's a great dude. And I've talked about it time and time again. I did a profile on him and his mom right after he got drafted. This guy has an amazing story and is just as good blue collar as it gets in terms of a professional athlete.
Yeah.
But beyond that, beyond the person, if Packer fans could just see what he does, if you could get 20 touches out of him in a game, and maybe some fans did. If you get out to the training camp practices this summer, maybe you will see it. Hopefully, you get some opportunities in preseason games. But this dude is different. And there's a reason why Daniel Jeremiah said he was the best running back in the 2024 draft. There is something about him with the way he's built and the amount of explosiveness in his legs. He could be a really interesting weapon in this offense that's unlike any running back, unlike any receiver. I just think that he can be a jolt of offense that the Packers really need, and I think Matt LaFleur could really utilize. The other people that I would really quickly touch on, one, from looking at the receiving core, I think Savion Williams is in a really unique position because they're still going to have a lot of the just getting the ball in his hands, just getting him touches. So whether that's as a running back, whether that's on jet sweeps, but I felt like one of the real untapped things about him that we got a small sense of in New York is that he's a pretty good 50-50 ball catcher too. I don't know too much about his route running yet. We haven't really had a chance to see him run a plethora of routes. But when he's downfield, he has really good body control. And with his athleticism, speed, and size, he can make some spectacular catches. And I think being able to sprinkle him more into this offense behind those starting three is going to be really important. Defensively, I am so geared up for Edgerrin Cooper in Jonathan Gannon's defense. I think you're going to get more towards the 2024 version of Edge than what we saw last year, which he was very, very good last year, but he was playing more of a traditional inside linebacker, weak side linebacker role. I think there's going to be a lot more flexibility now with utilizing his talents, whether it is in the pass rush plan, whether it is dropping back in cover. I just think there's so much out there for him that I'm excited to watch it. And the last thing I'll say, again, this is a guy that Packer fans are familiar with, but Javon Bullard is right there, dude. He just needs the takeaways. If that guy would have had 2 interceptions last year, we would have been talking about him as one of the best slot cornerbacks in the game. He plays physical. He plays downhill. He's built for the position. And his attitude and his swagger is something I think the Packers, not only defensively, but as a football team, desperately need. People talk about aura. Javon Bullard is aura. And if he's out there for 17 games, man, I think watch out, because that's one position that Green Bay has struggled to find a guy that could be there for 5-6 years, right? They had it for a time with Charles Woodson, a very brief window there with Casey Hayward, but I'm really excited about Javon Bullard. As much conversation, as much talk, and deservedly so, that Evan Williams gets as a free safety, that respect, I think, is coming for Javon Bullard in the slot.
Oh, this is so clippable when they have highlight reels and we see Defensive Player of the Year coming up and Edges in there. I mean, absolutely love it. Yeah, as you said, safety position in Gannon's defense is a focal point, right? So we should hopefully expect to see a resurgence there. Look, Weston Hodkiewicz, god damn it, man, thanks for coming on. Absolutely brilliant having you on. And if we see more of you behind the scenes, and get yourself in front of the camera, you know what I mean? I'm loving the hair. I'm loving the hair, Wes,
the hair for
today,
about another
especially.
4 hours, because this is going to get trimmed down again. I was joking with some people, when I was at the Press Gazette, I had the wild soccer boy haircut. Maybe I need to add that one more time. We'll see. I don't know, but otherwise the fade is coming in about 4 hours here. So it's been like 6 weeks haircut.
I'll vote for Bob Ross / Wes Hodkiewicz. That would be amazing. You could do little art classes now. Yeah, let's go. Weston Hodkiewicz, thank you very much for coming on, brother. Absolutely love it.
Appreciate you.